one thing. I hope Nick is listening, and I hope he listens at some point on the Jacob Media YouTube channel. Now,
He
I'm
does.
going to tell him right now, they're all going to think your offense stinks by week 2, so don't worry about it.
Subscribe to the Jacob Media channel on YouTube for access to all daily sports content.
That's right. You heard the man. Subscribe to the Jacob Media YouTube platform. It's where you can find all of John and I's conversations nightly, all of John's other appearances on The Middle, which you can hear 11 to 1, Monday to Friday, right here on 1490, as well as Philly Voice. John's everywhere, all right? That's the point. Subscribe to Jacob Media YouTube channel, and you can get all of us, including my nightly reactions and much more. So, speaking of reactions, John, what the heck happened? John, are you with us? I think you got a little excited.
Are you there? I got you.
John, can you hear me now?
I do hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I think Darren Ravel hacked into our system. All right, so let's start from the top. I said, speaking of reactions, what the heck happened today?
It's always interesting with the Philadelphia Eagles, and I think, as we get more information about this process, it came down to, I mentioned on the show, and I said I'd take my hits. I thought Josh McDaniels would be the head coach of this team by Wednesday or Thursday. Got the timing right. Got the wrong guy. And now it comes out. Obviously, there were a lot of people around the league that thought Josh was going to get the job, including, as we've mentioned publicly, Eric Bieniemy's agent. Turns out, basically, the Eagles went through that first round of interviews, and Josh came out of that in the lead, and they were concerned, and mainly by they, I say Jeffrey Lurie was concerned about the baggage that we talked about with Denver and Indianapolis. And I kind of kept going and kept going and kept going. And number 9 of 10 hit the home run, and that's Nick Sirianni. And, a lot of it I do think has to do with Frank Reich and their respect for Frank Reich. And, I think it's a little ironic in the fact that if you go back to 2016, they wanted Adam Gase. They weren't able to work things out there. They wanted Ben McAdoo. They weren't able to work things out there. And then they kind of called up Andy Reid, and Andy told them to hire Doug Peterson. And now you fast forward, and they're talking to all these people, and they had some interest in Robert Saleh and Arthur Smith, really a lot of interest, but obviously those guys weren't going to come here, and even more so Lincoln Riley, which was, probably the number 1 choice overall, and that didn't get anywhere. And then they kind of called Frank Reich because I don't think Andy wanted to talk to him after what they did to Doug, so they went to Frank. And we end up on Nick Sirianni.
Man, I have so much to say, but I'm going to try and keep it organized here and get through this because there's so much to digest. Let's start with this. Who the heck is Nick Sirianni? I got that question probably 10 times today, John.
Yeah, one of the things about the Eagles, and I guess I should be more clear when I say these things. It's really Jeffrey. It's really Jeffrey Lurie. I think he takes a lot of pride, and he should, in that 1999 hire of Andy Reid. And basically, he was off the radar. Nobody knew who he was except, people in the league who really understood the coaching profession, but he wasn't at that level where he's getting interviews yet. And the Eagles took the dive in the deep end, so to speak. He was about 40 years old at the time. And obviously it worked out pretty well. And now we have, you kind of fast forward to this search, and you have a 39-year-old guy who a little bit further ahead than Andy because he was actually a coordinator, but he wasn't a coordinator that called plays. This is his first interview ever to be a head coach. So there's a lot of similarities, and I think they enjoy finding that diamond in the rough. And, that part of it's probably a little bit of an ego. But, Nick has been around in San Diego with the Chargers. Before they moved to Los Angeles, he was Phillip Rivers' quarterback coach and sort of jockeyed back and forth, also coached receivers out there and when Frank was there as the offensive coordinator. And then obviously Frank got fired there, came to Philadelphia, Doug Peterson's offensive coordinator. The setup in Indianapolis was very similar to that, in that Doug was the play caller here. Frank had a large imprint on the game plan and preparing that. And that's how Frank set it up in Indianapolis with he's the play caller, and then Nick, who he brought over because he knew him from the Chargers, was really a big imprint on the game plan. So, and that's another thing, and I wrote about this on Sports Illustrated today because I was talking to a couple players. And, Frank's running the same offense Doug runs, which is, understandable to their offense. They put it together. But I do think it's interesting for the Eagles for obvious reasons. I mean, so it's a clear indication. And by the way, one of those players told me the exact same terminology as well. So clearly they didn't have a problem with the offensive system, the offensive scheme. The problems had to do with the relationship with Carson Wentz, and even more so, the assistant coaches with Doug Peterson. Otherwise, he'd still be here.
I'm going to skip a couple of questions here because this is fresh in my mind. Can you name a situation in the past, John, where someone was brought in as the head coach to fix the quarterback and they successfully did so?
No, and if that's why the Eagles if that was, the one thing they harped on and said, you have to fix Carson Wentz, and that's why we're going to hire you to be the coach. I mean, it's doomed for failure. And I've criticized Jeffrey a lot through this process. And I think he deserves criticism, to be honest, but and certainly more so than Howie Roseman, who I know to the average fan is the villain here. But I think they have that part of it wrong. If that's his decision, if that's the lone reason he's hiring Nick Sirianni, it's going to fail. But and again, I say that because I've criticized him a lot. I don't believe that's the case. I mean, that's part of it, but I do think he understands that there's much, much more to it.
We've talked a lot about being a CEO, managing people and personalities. What type of personality is Nick Sirianni? What type of guy is he? Like, how is he going to handle the media? And this is all projections, but I just don't know the man at all. So I don't know how much you know, but what type of guy, what type of leader can we expect?
Yeah, I mean, we're all going to have to wait. I've never talked to him in my life, never met him anywhere. So it's going to be new to a lot of people. The fact that Frank Reich thinks so highly of him is obviously a positive because, he's got a ton of respect around this league, not only the Eagles for what he did. I mean, long before he even got here, everybody loves Frank as a person. So right there, that's going to put a good stamp on things. But as far as how this is a big uptick, and I'm sure Frank is going to be giving him advice. And Frank wasn't even the head coach here; he was the only coordinator. But there's going to be a tad more scrutiny in Philadelphia than Indianapolis. So, yeah, he's a 39-year-old guy who's never done this. So that's something you're going to have to keep an eye on because it's not easy. And I say this all the time. And ownership groups or organizations or teams that hire a scheme or a go about coaching that way, X's and O's, they're going about it the wrong way because the job is so much bigger than that. I do think Jeffrey understands that. And that's why, you have to give him credit. He's been successful hiring coaches. When you compare it to the rest of the league,
yeah.
Again, everything, I always put everything in context. Is it perfect? Certainly not. But every single one of his coaches that he's hired finished with over a 500 record. Ray Rhodes, obviously Andy, even Chip Kelly, Doug Peterson. Every single one of them is over 500. Every single one of them has made the playoffs. Ray was coach of the year at one point. So, if you compare that to other organizations, that's a pretty good record. So you do have to give him some rope in the fact to say he's hired pretty good coaches. I think the problem with Jeffrey Lurie is he doesn't, except for Andy, obviously being the notable exception, he's too quick to scapegoat. And I say that all the time. And, he's very, and by the way, he's very common. And that would be an insult to him because he doesn't want to be common. But that's the natural reaction in this league because I always say it's a public-facing industry, so you have to deal with the fans. You have to deal with the fan base. You're reading social media. You're reading, you're listening to talk radio. You see all the angst, and you want to blame somebody. And as we just saw on a 4-11-1 season, what did they do? They're looking after it ends. Their first thought process is, okay, who do we blame? And that's bad enough during a 4-11-1 season. You go back the year before, they're 9-7, which is not great in a bad division, but they do make the playoffs. They probably win that playoff game if Carson Wentz doesn't get hurt, and they're still looking to blame, and they're still looking to scapegoat. And it was Mike Groh and Carson Walsh at that point, and that's where I think his issues lie, because this industry is cyclical, and you're going to have good years and you're going to have bad years, and it's going to be tied to personnel. And you should be smart enough. You've been doing this for 27 years. You should be smart enough to understand that.
I hate how this looks, the optics of this and how it looks, the perception. Like, this is, to me, and let me know if I'm out of line here. You always do. Like, to me, I look at this as, well, let's go with what Frank Reich says. And, Frank and Carson were really close. So I'm sure Frank and Carson have spoke over the past month. Frank let him know how good of a guy he is and how much he'll enjoy, playing for him. And then he said that to Jeffrey Lurie. And now here we are. Like, this is solely based off of Frank Reich's and Carson Wentz's relationship and Jeffrey Lurie desperate to not burn all of the money that he backed up in the Brinks truck for Carson Wentz.
Well, I've been saying that part of it from the start. It was going to be very difficult for them to move on from Carson Wentz this season, whether Doug was here or now that Nick is here. That's just part of it. That part of it's baked in. But I do think it's more of, look, the Eagles can go about it one of two ways. They can say, well, we gotta take our medicine. They've called it a transition year over and over again. You go 4-12 again, or 4 wins again, and then you restart in 2022, and it's at least a little bit more palatable from a salary cap, from a dead money standpoint. It's still bad, but it's much better than it would be this season. Or you can try to salvage him and try to say, okay, this guy played at a really high level at one point, and I don't think he's ever going to get back to that level. But I do think it's realistic to say he can get back to the level he was in, say, 2019, which was a good player. And I think that's the goal. It's not about just getting through the season, holding your nose, and then saying, okay, we can move on. I think they want to turn him back into a good player if that's possible. And by the way, it might not be possible, and it's not going to help because, the NFLPA is already on record. D. Smith is saying we're probably not going to have an off season again. And for all the talk, and we've talked about this a lot, Ryan. What's wrong with Carson Wentz? What is it? What is it? Injuries? Is it this? Is it the concussion? The mechanics? I think more than anything else, it was the lack of an off season. And when you're left to your own devices, and this is really that shows up with great players, and you hear the legendary work ethics of somebody like Michael Jordan. In football, you talk about Jerry Rice, but quarterback-wise, you have Peyton Manning, the version, the football version of a gym rat. If you want to be great, you got to do stuff on your own. And I got the distinct feeling Carson didn't do anything in this off season, left to his own devices. Now, part of that might be just becoming a father, not having time. Maybe it corrects itself. But if he's going to be fixed as a player, it's going to have nothing to do with Nick Sirianni. It's going to have everything to do with Carson Wentz.
What are the expectations now, year one, for Coach Sirianni? We all know Carson throws 2 picks in an opening day loss. It's Jalen Hurts time from the fans. It's who is this guy on the sideline? It's, we all know the storm that's waiting. So what are the expectations, year one?
Well, I think they're different. Fans want to win no matter what. They're not going to put up with a transition period, whatever you want to call a rebuild. They don't want to see 4 wins again. And if he wins 4 games, they're going to be talking about firing him after his first season. They were talking about firing Doug after his first season. They won 7 games with a rookie quarterback. So, I don't think, I just talked about Jeffrey Lurie wanting to scapegoat people, but I don't think he does it that quickly. But I do think, there's a chance this is their version of Brett Brown, so to speak. Now, it's not, they're not going to be, it's not going to be like a 6-year tank in the NFL. You don't have to do that. But the point is, maybe they do have a couple down seasons. And then you say, okay, we're starting to get better again. Maybe we need a different coach. I think all of that depends on how Nick handles himself. And, that's the unknown. That's always the unknown, no matter who tells you what. This is a guy who's never called an NFL play in his life. This is a guy who is never been a head coach at any level. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. You just try to get to know somebody as much as you can. Like anybody who's ever hired anybody in any industry, it's the same type of thing.
Yeah.
You try to get references and you try to pick the best candidate you can. Now, obviously, the Eagles will tell us whenever they introduce Nick and they haven't obviously announced that yet. You know how this goes. They'll tell us this was the best guy, this was our number one choice, and everybody knows that's a lie. Everybody knows they'd rather have Lincoln Riley. They'd rather have Robert Saleh, Arthur Smith, on and on and on. But it is what it is. Sometimes it works out. They didn't want Doug Peterson either. It worked out.
So next question is, how does John McMullen envision the coaching staff to shape up? What are, a guy as a head coach who's never called a play in the NFL, you'd probably like to have some some legitimate talent around him on the coaching staff?
Well, I mean, you always want a strong coaching staff, but more important is the defensive coordinator for obvious reasons. I mean, Nick's going to call plays, so it'll be interesting. I mean, I don't even know. The Eagles have a number of assistant coaches under contract that could stay, and I said, middle of the week. That's when that shift started. I mentioned that, all of a sudden Jeff Stoutland wasn't going to Alabama anymore. And then Dave Phipp got blocked from interviewing with the Detroit Lions because he's still under contract. That was a clear indication in the shift from Josh McDaniels to Nick Sirianni. At that point, you say, okay, the Eagles, they're going to keep these guys, and they're going to keep these guys to put them on Nick's staff. So there's certain guys. Dave, as I said, is obviously going to still be here as the special teams coordinator. And who knows? I mean, the talk with Jeff is, he didn't necessarily want to stay, depending who the coach was. So he's got to make that decision. And obviously, Deuce Staley's got to be upset. So I can't speak for Deuce Staley, but if he's got other options, he's probably going to look at them. And then Jonathan Gannon, who's the secondary coach of the Colts, a lot of talk about him potentially being the defensive coordinator.
Talking with John McMullen, our NFL Eagles insider. John, what about responsibilities? Because if I have to bring up perception again, it seems like this is a perfect puppet situation, for all the reasons that you've mentioned. All right, this is a guy where new in a lot of ways to being a head coach in the NFL. So Jeffrey Lurie now has the strings in the palm of his hands.
Yeah, that part of it's true. I mean, and it's not necessarily a good thing. And, but you can look at it the other way as well. I mean, when the story is told and we know everything about this coaching search, and when we get to talk to people sort of behind the scenes, off the record, and all that kind of stuff, it's going to be interesting to see where the shift happened with Josh McDaniels to Nick Sirianni, because and I said on the show with you, it surprised me that evidently Howie Roseman was championing Josh McDaniels coming to the Philadelphia Eagles, which, Josh is a control freak to an almost ludicrous degree in Denver. Now, again, that's a long time ago. He himself has said he learned from that. He seemed to be more malleable, to be willing to work with other people. But you have to wonder, as it got closer and closer, did even Howie kind of say, well, do I really want this guy? Because you never know what happens when somebody gets in the building. He had been through that with Chip Kelly. When Chip Kelly first got here, he said, I don't want anything to do with personnel. There's not enough time in the day. And then all of a sudden, he didn't like what Howie was doing, and you know what happened. So I think there's at least a chance that he said, as it got closer to fruition, that maybe you rethink it and say, do I really want this guy in the building? Or maybe it was just Jeffrey and saying, I've talked about it a lot. When your agent fires you for being unprofessional, and that's what happened with Josh in Indianapolis, that's a lot of baggage. And remember, I talked about Jeffrey in public-facing industries and wanting to blame people. There's also that part of it as well, where you have to sell somebody to the fan base. And even though I don't think they're excited about Nick Sirianni, in fact, I know they're not excited because nobody knows who the heck he is. I think it would have been worse if they hired Josh McDaniels because everybody does know who he is, and they don't like him.
It's another great point, and we're going to have to get more into it tomorrow before the weekend. It's another point where you can say this is a safe hire. They're avoiding a PR nightmare, which maybe that's dramatic, but that could have been the case if you bring on Josh McDaniels, pointing to his past. This guy, everyone's like, well, I don't know. He's under Frank Reich, and the whole fan base is obsessed with Frank Reich. He's the guy he was the reason that the Eagles won the Super Bowl.
I know. Yeah, it is, from that standpoint, yeah, it's a lot safer. And it is. You can point to Frank. And so there's so much irony to this. It's unbelievable because I always go back to 2016, and I just mentioned, I'll go back, it's been the theme of this call, the scapegoating. In 2016, the Eagles were seriously thinking about firing Frank Reich and elevating John DeFilippo, who was going to get the offensive coordinator job with the Jets. And the Eagles blocked him because he was under contract. And John was not happy about that for obvious reasons. And they were thinking about trying to make him happy by getting rid of Frank and making him the offensive coordinator. And Doug stepped in and basically saved Frank's job.
You're hearing
how much he liked him, how much he respected him.
Sorry.
And then you fast forward, and here we are, and Frank Reich is validating Doug's replacement. It's crazy. This league is crazy.
It's, fire Andy, go in new direction. Direction is wrong way, recalculating. Call Andy for the right directions. Hire Doug, fire Doug, burn the bridge with Andy Reid. So you have to call Frank Reich. It's like you start to piece these items together on the timeline, and it's laughable, John. It really is.
Yeah, and there is one. Early in this process, a lot of us, including me, thought Mike Kafka was going to be a big part of this. He would have been a big part of this. He was another guy who took himself out of the equation. He said, I don't have any interest, which stuns me. So I don't know if that I don't know if that was advice from Andy, because I don't think Andy was happy on what they did with Doug Peterson. But that is, there's a lot of people who didn't want this job.
Well, Nick Sirianni, you, sir, you're the lucky winner. Come on down. Fix Carson Wentz. Never say no to Jeffrey Lurie. Good luck, my friend. Also in the toughest city to coach, arguably, in the world for professional sports. It should be a fun off season and a fun regular season like it always is with you and I, John. So we'll get more into this tomorrow and head into the weekend on a interesting note like usual.
Yeah, it never ends. And one thing, I hope Nick is listening, and I hope he listens at some point on the Jacob Media YouTube channel. Now,
I'm
going to tell him right now, they're all going to think your offense stinks by week 2, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, just assume it does, Nick. All right, John, I appreciate it, man.
All right, thanks, Ryan.
Yep, there he is, Johnny Mack, J-Mac, our Eagles insider, and you're not going to want to go anywhere. I'm about to drop a bomb on this Philadelphia Eagles organization. You thought I nuked Jeffrey Lurie earlier in the week? You thought I reacted a little extreme earlier in the week? Keep it right here. We'll be right back.